Greetings, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evenings from joining all time zones today for our seminar hosted by the Lab for Character Assassination and Reputation Politics, also lovingly known as CARP. I will first start with my introduction. My name is Farah Latif. I am a political communication scholar with a interest in reputation management. I am a professional lecturer at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And I consult with organizations and individuals on reputation management. So my latest work, academic work, is this book titled Late Night in Washington, Political Humor and the American Presidency, with my esteemed co-authors. This book is one in a series of many that focuses on political communication and satire. So the premise of this research body is that political communication and media goes hand in hand. And to elaborate this connection a little more vividly, I'll go over a couple of points. So the first is that late night comedians have assumed the role of journalists. So they claim not to be afraid of punching up to authority. They claim to question authority. At one point, David Letterman even proclaimed that the road to U.S. presidency goes through me, which was in reaction to John McCain canceling his appearance on his show last minute. And it did make John McCain come back and apologize, but in vain, unfortunately. Something else to keep in mind is that satire and comedy makes political news palatable and cathartic. So we know that a 2022 Pew Research Center study shows that 32% of Americans 16 to 40-year-old find news consumption enjoyable. So that's where satire and news media comes in. They may consume this news live in late night shows, but they also have this connection with social media where they will go on and look up the information the next morning on social media and then reshare on social media. Another trend that we are seeing in Gen Z is that they find media and journalists less trustworthy, and they're finding social media influencers more trustworthy for news consumption, specifically for political news and policy-related news. And that has not gone the political campaigns are not blind to this fact. They have actually now given press credentials to famous influencers, and politicians may give them time for interviews just they would to any tier one media. So with that, I will say that I recognize many names here, but for the interest of those who are new, let me introduce CARP very quickly. CARP came into being as a collaboration between a multidisciplinary set of scholars with very global perspectives to examine character assassination, ad hominem attacks, both historically and present day. So the focus is on those who conduct those attacks and those who are targets of those attacks, and also those constituents, so the leftover group, those endure the consequences of this character attack transaction. Over the years, this community of scholars have grown to include more diverse perspectives and add collaborations with many similar-minded scholars. And I must say that my interest in political communication and reputation management began with being around this set of scholars. So today's discussion is about character attacks in US presidential elections. We will discuss how some of the old tricks we still see played out today, what we had seen historically in presidential elections and reputation management of leaders in antiquity, are still played out using modern technology today. So the discussion will revolve around these interesting topics, especially since we are only a few days away from US presidential elections. So again, if you are just joining in, thank you again for joining us today. We've scheduled webinar for 1 hour. And in the interest of time and respect for everyone's schedules, we will try to limit our discussion to an hour. First, I will have the panelists come and talk about what they have been up to and what news and events we have to look forward to coming from CARP. And then I will open up with some questions to the panel. And at the end, we will open chat from the participants if you have questions for the panelists. Please keep your questions short. During the discussion, please keep your mics muted. And if you have any comments, please continue to share them as we go. So with that, first I will invite Eric to tell us a little bit about what is going on with his scholarly work and with CARP.
Thanks so much. If I am able to share my slide, it will be great if I see. So I think you need to go to chat, right? And so, or to share basically. Share, and so again, let's get my slide available right there. And so I will share this. I don't think you have to see my face, but anyway, here you go. This Northern Virginia. Today it's a lovely, chilly afternoon or late morning. Way back in my scholarly studies, it's in California, UCLA, and later just in the West Coast, my professor told me, in electoral studies, you have to do and study empirical evidence. You study negative campaigning. That's my interest way back there in the 1990s. And my mentor, Lee Siegelman, GW, or James Sidanius, he was a head of African American Studies at Harvard, and Joe Zeller, UCLA, and others would tell me, you must provide empirical evidence. You can speculate and you become a journalist. Sorry, but you can analyze from philosophical. You're a philosopher, but you're a political scientist. You have to study empirical evidence, and we just will delve into the empirical evidence. However, we must understand that in political science. Sorry for just saying that my students and my graduate students, yeah, we're still just taking these initial steps in understanding how character assassination, negative campaigns work. So what do we know today? And again, I'll be as brief and concise as possible. What do we know today? There is a, well, I'll call it the CARP model, which is, I am a little bit arrogant. It's not the CARP model. It's based on studies of so many political science, political psychology, sociology, communication studies professors who told us about this factors. And this is what we know today about elections, and let's apply to elections of here in the United States in 2024. You attack your opponent. You call the opponent bad name. You say, policies aside, look at his or her record in the past. Well, this is about what they said, what they said. So, uh, character attacks work according to empirical studies because they allow to mobilize supporters. How many of them? There's 30, 40% in the United States, only Republicans, Democrats committed to vote for Kamala Harris or for Trump. But how about this magic 10%? So you mobilize supporters so that you don't care about the 10% here on the margins. You mobilize them. You say that Trump is crook, and then you're Democrat, you say, yes, he is a crook. He's a crook. Yeah, there we go. Your Trump supporter, people say, well, Kamala Harris, she is a flake. Sorry about that. Mean that she's, well, superficial. She's not really a smart politician. There we go, flake. And then there you go. Supporters will stay in your camp. Second factor, prevent defections from own camp. By the way, these factors have been empirically tested. There are papers published on that, really good papers, and just I was a co-author of some of those, so that's why I can claim I contribute something like that, but just minuscule contribution because there were giants behind me who just rightly published those papers, Lee Siegelman, and other James Daniels and others. Prevent defection from own camp. So don't make 3, 4, 5% of your supporters disappointed. So you attack your opponent, attack, just distort the evidence, just slam it, just attack, and then you can retain these 4 or 5% of your supporters. Uh, Create confusion within opposition. So that's the desirable goal of many individuals who sponsor and who design the campaigns. Confusion within opposition. Again, we're trying to be as scientific as possible right there. Create confusion. No political undertone in my comment. Wonderful interview of Bob Woodward, a reporter from Washington Post, who exactly the person who helped uncover Watergate. Many people, but he was on top maybe 3, 4, 5 individuals who helped uncover the Watergate scandal and Nixon policies. Bob Woodward yesterday. And Fox News, by the way, of all networks, Fox News is definitely, just no question about it, is a Republican network. No question about that. So he was invited to present, and he said, "I'm not here to sway opponents," he said, "but these are my facts." And he was really persuasive, saying that Trump is unstable. His character is really strange in so many ways. He's unpredictable. He doesn't have a team. So many Republicans say, well, Trump is in office. He has a team of people. Bob Woodward said, no, he doesn't have a team. This is the one person. So it's make your own decision. So I think it was very persuasive, basically. You can go just on YouTube and check his interview on Fox News. I think with Brad Baer was there. Really persuasive. There you go. Confusion within. Why? Well, if you're confused, you don't go and vote, right? And the 2, 3, 4% in Virginia, 2, 3, 4% North Carolina, 2, 3, 4, 5% in Pennsylvania, you decide the election. Come. Sway the undecided. I put a picture here of Jimmy Carter. Honestly, this is my personal passion. So I like Jimmy Carter, so his passion, his ideas, even people say naive and it's not practical, but there was a person who really deserved to be president, and he was. Sway the undecided. His passion, his compassion, uh, people say, well, he was a peanut farmer. Well, he was big owner and wealthy person, but still, it's an image of in the Soviet Union, I was a boy in the Soviet Union, and the communist newspaper Pravda published a paper saying that what's a poor choice for Americans? 1976. What was a poor, excuse me, 1980. What's a poor choice for Americans? Is a peanut farmer or cowboy from California, just a movie actor. Americans doomed, Yankees as well, they're doomed. But well, Carter lost in 1980, but he won in 1986. So Spoiler undecided. And finally, and give me 30 seconds for that. This is something which have never been tested. And this is what we argued in the recent conference in Venice. This Dr. Icks and Dr. Armstrong went to the conference, and we talked about this briefly, about that. That's so many people, so many politicians just try to character attack others, their opponents, because they don't really calculate what will affect, not affect, and they don't listen to the interns who just smart people from George Mason, GW, just tell them what to do. No, they ignore. This is their self-assurance. If I say that my opponent is a crook, my opponent is a liar, so I feel good about this. It is an important psychological factor which requires further studies, and I invite you, students and graduate students, and my fellow professors who just study the subject. Yeah, but let's examine this. So I say something negative, something really nasty, bad about my opponent because this is my identity. It is what I want to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Eric, for this engaging, providing a sort of a psychological sketch of those who engage in character assassination and what is it for them in doing so. Jennie, do you want to take it away?
Thank you. My name's Jennifer Keohane, and I am a rhetorical critic. And so what I want to do really quickly is help us think a little bit about some of the ways that the 2016 election provided some orientation and outcomes that we might compare a little bit to what's happening here in 2020. And this research that I'm going to present today to you in 10 minutes actually comes out of an edited volume put together by our colleague Edwina Hagen. And it is in Dutch. I do not speak or write Dutch, but they were nice enough to translate my article and actually include it in English too. But this issue will be launched in November and include some work from Martijn as well and some of our other CARP colleagues and friends. But so I specifically was looking at character attacks in the ancient history of 2016. And the 2016 presidential election or presidential debates drew my attention because the first Clinton-Trump debate was the most watched presidential debate in history. 84 million people watched the first one. And that, of course, does not compare to Trump, Biden, et cetera. If we think about the 2016 election campaign, and again, here we see people flocking to watch these debates, scholars like Mary Borton have called it the year of the alpha male, pointing to masculine bravado as the main strategy that Trump utilized to dominate and belittle his opponents. If I need to remind you of what this conversation was all about, I'm sorry, but a conversation about hand size as stand-in for male genitalia in the primary Republican debates should, I think, give us some implication there about kind of Trump's strategy as the dominant alpha male. The 2016 debates between Trump and Clinton really transformed the race. Clinton opened up a massive lead, and polling data confirms that people thought that she won all three. Nonetheless, and I will say these debates have garnered a lot of scholarly attention, including looking at them as public argument, doing a content analysis of news coverage, and exploring the gendered overtones. But I want to look at these debates, of course, in the context of character assassination. And in my sort of deep rhetorical dive into these debates, I identified two main character attacks on Clinton, that she's mean and that she lacks judgment. And to me, these jump out because they reflect the tenets of the gendered double bind, which is still, I think, a really important concept for understanding women seeking political power in the United States. So I'm not going to tell you that character assassination happens because it works. Eric just told us that. But I do want to introduce you to the concept of the gender double bind, which comes from political communication expert Kathleen Hall Jamieson. And a double bind is a rhetorical construct that offers two alternatives, but both of them penalize the less powerful person being offered them. Jamieson identifies a handful of double binds, but the one that most clearly applies to Hillary Clinton and our case here is femininity and competence. And the idea here, basically what it sounds like, is that a leader can either be feminine or competent, but we know that leadership requires competence, aggression, decisiveness, traits that we stereotypically don't associate with women's leadership style. The gender double bind provides intense fodder for character assassination because character attackers accuse others of acting inauthentically. And I've written extensively about authenticity before, which I won't rehearse here. But let me briefly provide you the data to back up my interpretation of these character attacks. And I don't mean to suggest that these are the only two attacks Trump made, but overwhelmingly he returned to these in all three of the debates. Now, the first attack that Clinton's mean attacks her femininity obliquely, suggesting that natural women, of course, are caring and feminine. And so he said things like this in the first debate: Hillary's hitting me with tremendous commercials. Some of it is somebody who's very vicious to me. She spent hundreds of millions of dollars on negative ads on me, many of which are absolutely untrue. They're untrue. And they're misrepresentations. And I will tell you this, Lester, they're not nice, and I don't deserve that. So Lester Holt was moderating this debate, if you don't remember that. He returned later in this debate to the comment that Clinton had made, calling Trump supporters a basket of deplorables, which she later apologized for. But Trump uses that to say she has tremendous hate in her heart. When she said they're irredeemable, to me, that might have been even worse. So again, setting up the frame that Clinton is vicious and mean. But there's sort of a subset of this attack, which is asking Clinton to answer for the viciousness of Bill Clinton. And so Trump says there's never been anybody in the history of politics in this nation that's been so abusive to women as Bill Clinton. Clinton viciously, here he's talking about Hillary Clinton viciously attacked those same women. 4 of them are here tonight. One of the women, who's a wonderful woman at 12 years old, was raped at 12. Her client she represented got him off, and she's seen laughing on 2 separate occasions, laughing at the girl who was raped. If that doesn't make sense, that's okay. But what's happening here, the story that Trump is telling, comes out pretty garbled. But what he's doing is he's mixing Clinton's alleged indifference to the long history of Bill's sexual misconduct and her role as a court-appointed lawyer defending a rapist to attack her ethos of being a supporter of women. And I do think it's important that Trump strategically shifts his attacks to Bill Clinton to, again, continue to allow him to perform the alpha male. I think it's also important to recognize, of course, that men get penalized more harshly than women for being mean. And in fact, many men that serve in Congress are well known for being mean, not just on the right. Bernie Sanders is apparently not very nice either. So our second attack here is that Clinton lacks judgment, which is an attack on her competence. And throughout the 3 debates, Trump brought up Clinton's alleged lack of judgment 9 times. He also loved to resurrect Bernie Sanders here as the arbiter of judgment, saying that Bernie Sanders thinks that Clinton has bad judgment. And here we see him putting it in the context of immigration. And I'm not going to read that quote to you, but again, here we see Trump invoking men as the arbiters of appropriate judgment, which Clinton does not have. One of the other things that I think is important about what Trump's doing here is shifting his attention to business. So Trump casts his accusations of Clinton's incompetence in an arena in which he feels comfortable, business. And so he sort of crystallizes her long experience in politics into bad experience, but he also tends to focus on her deal-making experience. So here he says, the Iran deal that you're so in love with, where we gave them $150 billion back, it's the Iran deal, whether it's anything you can name. You almost can't name a good deal. I agree. She's got experience, but it's bad experience. So here he's shifting the context in which he's attacking from politics to business and building his credibility to attack. So overall, Trump's attacks on Clinton may seem gender neutral. He's not attacking her looks or overtly saying that women are unfit to serve as president. But I want us to understand that these attacks resonate in a gender domain. By repeating that she's mean and by arguing that she lacked judgment, Trump mobilizes both strands of the gender double bind. I will say neither this article nor my presentation today gives us time to look at Clinton's responses. I don't mean to suggest that Clinton was a passive victim of character assassination here. She launched her own character attacks and reminded the audience of Trump's history of misogyny, undermining his moral character, discipline, and temperament. And so this is I don't know if y'all remember this ad. It was really quite remarkable, but was one that circulated around the election. And of course, she responds to the leak of the Access Hollywood tape by saying, Donald thinks belittling women makes him bigger. He goes after their dignity, their self-worth. And I don't think there's a woman anywhere that doesn't know what it feels like. So Clinton, of course, is launching her own attacks back. But for the purposes of this research, I'm looking specifically at Trump's attack. Now, my point is not that Trump really won the debates and that all of this polling data is wrong, but I do want us to explore the gendered registers in which the attacks that Trump used resonated, which put Clinton in a tough spot. And of course, the attacks, as I've shown, match the two prongs of the gendered double bind facing women politicians. I also think the fact that Trump shifted some key attacks to operate in the context of business, focusing on Clinton's deal-making ability, and to be on a man, on Bill Clinton, builds Trump's credibility. He also sort of distilled a simple message and a powerful persona. There's new experimental research showing that women are less likely to survive character attacks than men, which I think is important to remind us here. And of course, the question then becomes, what should Clinton have said? Clinton could have insisted upon her competence and her experience at the risk of undermining her femininity and confirming the long-standing critique that she was cold and calculating. Or she could have played up her stereotypical feminine traits like bipartisan cooperation while risking being seen as not authoritative enough to be president. So it is a tough situation. Jameson points to the power of meta-communication, of calling attention to those moments when women's leadership styles are devalued, moments when the double bind is being mobilized. The last thing I want to say really quickly is just a reminder of the lasting implications of this. And this goes into a conversation about the 2024 elections for sure. But Suzanne Dovey, who's a political scientist, wrote a recent article on political misogyny where she wrote that to treat nasty claims as merely personal attacks, whose harm is limited to highly visible women, is to ignore the dominion of political misogyny and its ability to reinforce the inequitable structural relations of the status quo. So I think it's important to recognize that when we talk about gendered attacks on Clinton or Kamala Harris, we're not just talking about them. We're talking about the broader context in which political misogyny lives. So thanks for letting me share this brief snapshot of some research with us. Back to you, Farah.
Oh, thank you very much for this fascinating overview. The topic of gendered politics is not over. We will look forward to your take in the next few months about what you noticed in this current presidential campaign. So thank you very much. Next, I will invite Martijn to please go ahead and share some of his insights with us.
Sure. Here we go. Yes, actually, I'm not gonna. So my name is Martijn Icks. I am a historian at the University of Amsterdam, but I've decided not to talk about historical cases in today's webinar because I think we're all very interested in the US election and we want to have a discussion about that. But before we move into that discussion, I would like to bring briefly two CARP projects to your attention. So Farah has already done a great job of introducing the CARP Research Lab, which many of you will already have been familiar with. I think we've been collaborating for quite some time now. We've organized several conferences. We've also published several books and volumes, including this one here. I hope you can see that, the Routledge Handbook of Character Assassination and Reputation Management. And the first news item I'd like to share with you now is that we've recently launched our own series of books, because so far our publications have been a bit scattered far and wide, different publishers, different formats. We thought it would be good to bring everything together. So we've been in touch with Amsterdam University Press, which is the university I'm working at, and they've agreed to collaborate with us on a series called Studies in Character Assassination and Reputation Management. You can see a link to the website here in case you'd like to explore it further. We'll put that in the chat later as well. But basically it means that all CARP-related projects now have found a home where we can all put them in the same series. So we've got 2 projects already lined up. One is a revised edition of the volume that, in a sense, started it all. That was our first joint publication, a volume called Character Assassination Throughout the Ages, which takes historical perspectives on the phenomenon of character assassination from the ancient Roman world, which is my own expertise, to the present day in various epochs and various cultures. We thought it would be nice to launch the series with an updated version of that book. So that's what we're working on at the moment. And many of you may also recall that we did our international conference in 2023 on the topic of character assassination, illiberalism, and the erosion of civic rights. So the next one in the lineup will be a conference volume based on some of the papers that were presented there. Next up is a monograph by Bill Benoit on the January 6th insurrection in the US and the committee hearings and character attacks related to Donald Trump. But I would like to invite all of you here, if you've got any ideas for projects, if you're working on a book, if there's something that you think might be a good match for this series, whether that's a monograph, whether that's an edited volume, to feel free to approach us or to have a look on the website and to submit a book proposal. And then we will certainly consider it. Everything that we publish in this series will be peer-reviewed and will be guaranteed to get a good readership. So we hope you'll take that into consideration and that we'll be able to continue this lineup that we have now with many more great publications. Yeah, and finally, I want to bring to your attention the CARP conference for 25, because we organize conferences biannually, and in 25 we'll host a conference on gender, power, and politics in character assassination, taking place at George Mason University, where Eric and Serge are both from March 20 to March 22. And as you can see, there is a QR code there that you can scan. We have extended our deadline for submissions of abstracts to the 1st of November. So there is still time to sign up if you are interested in attending or presenting something there. So back to you, Farah.
All right, thank you very much, Martijn. I think this is time that I begin with my set of questions. So my first question is for the panel, and please feel free to bring your own particular lens to this question. I'd like to get your take on what you find unique to this presidential campaign in terms of character attack tactics, right? What are some overarching trends on either campaigns that you notice? Something in particular that we notice, Trump's is no longer capturing attention the way he was. With the phrase that comes to mind is shock and awe attacks, right? Which George W. Bush used very differently. But that's what comes to mind. He would shock and leave us to think about what he just did, and then just do something else and completely leave us paralyzed. that's not what we see this time. He's not, as he used to say, being authentic. So please share some of your thoughts.
It's a good question. And I think, it's an especially interesting question because we as CARP have studied Kamala pretty extensively and have a paper coming out in a handbook edited by Sergei and one of his colleagues in the Shar School, I believe, at George Mason, looking specifically at attacks on Harris while she was vice president. And frankly, we see a lot of those same attacks recurring now that she's running for president. And they include, we've been talking a little bit in the chat about her being called mean, just like Clinton was called mean. That's an attack that we see recurring, although I think Rod is right in the chat as well, that she's been trying to dodge that a little bit with this embrace of joy in her campaign. Obviously, the idea of Comrade Kamala, tarring her with a far left label is something that we're hearing and seeing a lot. I think we're going to talk about Tim Walz in a second here, so I won't get into that too much. But one thing that I do think is interesting is that, and I don't want to suggest that this is uniformly true across the board, but I've seen some conversations on Twitter, now X, about the extent to which journalists should be smoothing out the language in Trump's speeches when they quote him. And in fact, I noticed myself doing it just now when I was reading some Trump quotes from the research that I just did, that I would complete a sentence even when it had been presented as a sentence fragment. And so I think we see, as we sort of reckon with how it is that the journalists cover Trump these days, we see some things happening differently in terms of not filling in the blanks in his quotations and presenting them unedited as well. I mean, there's a lot more that I could say about what's happening in the 2020 election, but I'm sure that Eric and Serge might have things that they want to say too.
We will, certainly. And exactly. And again, it has been studied, but I think Kamala Harris is likely to appear as the most kindest and the most pleasing, the most fun candidates, because she's cool, she's fine, she's smiling. And yet this can be used, and has been used by Republicans and by conservatives, saying, well, she's fine, she's smiling, she's really she's fine. However, she doesn't have an agenda. And then they just switched to the points, and then they're saying, well, she doesn't have an agenda, means that she is an empty suit. That was said about Barack Obama. Republicans regret it didn't work. It didn't work for Obama. The empty suit. Go back to see the commercials and to see comments way back for 10 years ago. Well, Obama's empty suit didn't work. Obama won almost landslide. But anyway, so this is the idea that, well, she's an empty suit. Will it work? Will it not work? This is what the problem with the Republicans have. Serge or Jennie.
Well, I will say, like, I don't want us to leave, and I think we can't leave the conversation about attacks on Harris and their uniqueness in the 2024 election without talking about race. Obviously, character assassination is understood in a context that includes gender, race, and we've written and researched this pretty extensively in the work that we've done on Harris. But certainly I think one of the other things that we see sort of a tool in Trump's toolbox for 2024 that he did not have in 2016 is the idea of, attacking Harris based on race. And so, he says, oh, she happened to turn black, right? Or whatever she's calling herself these days, right? As ways of kind of resurrecting questions about race where Harris is concerned. But Serge, anything you want to chime in on?
Thank you, Jennie. For me personally, this campaign is much more interesting than even campaign in 2016 because of the sociocultural political context. In a sense, we have become more polarized as society. And therefore, there is more bias involved in perception of candidates. And technically, if you look at how different camps perceive opposite candidates, it's very clear. Well, liberals think, well, they know everything about Trump, so there is not much to know. I mean, they already have an opinion about him. So some of the character attacks actually add anything new rather than confirmation bias. We already kind of established our perception of this guy. The Trump camp basically think, well, we still don't know anything about Harris and we don't care. And that's why any kind of attacks against her kind of, again, serve as a confirmation bias. But what's more interesting is we have interesting choices for vice presidential candidates, and whatever, and there is more attention towards them compared to 2016 campaign. So whatever they do or say will eventually kind of will be under scrutiny and will also affect the primary candidates in this election. So like the infamous peasant hunting of Tim Walz, for example. So I think this campaign is super interesting. It's more nuanced in terms of kind of this contextual nature of it. And so when we talk about Trump versus Harris, we have to talk about vice presidential candidates, while it was not the case in 2016.
Jennie, I do have Troy Mitchell, who studied the perception of U.S. campaign, negative campaign in Australia. Troy, can you say a few things about that? It's about how people see things in Australia?
Oh, for sure. So just to briefly go over what I had found, about 40% of Australian media was pro-Harris. About 40% was like politically unaligned or like ambiguous about it, with the remaining 20 being overtly pro-Trump. And I think that kind of lines up with a lot of Australians' kind of characterization of the election, because I'm just trying to think of how to phrase it. Like, Trump's just not really seen as like a stable person. Like, a lot of people might agree with his policies because there's a lot of Australian politicians who have the exact same viewpoint as him. But it's like specifically the character aspect of like how he behaves, how he talks to people, that people really find unappealing, I think, at least over there. So even people who would like traditionally be pro-Trump and like agree with him on every material aspect of his campaign still just have that issue with agreeing with him because of who he is. And I think that's a really interesting way that you know, they differ from us in how we don't see that as big of a deal as they do, apparently.
Excellent. Colleagues, comments, questions?
Thank you very much, all of you, and thank you, Troy, for providing a different perspective to us. So my next question is aligned with what Serge was talking about, confirmation bias and character attacks. And my question is for Eric. So going off to not a presidential candidate, but someone who has given us Trump type fodder, George Santos, a lot of accusations against were objectively true. At what point does character assassination attacks keep some bad apples from entering politics and public service? And can you talk a little bit about how character assassination attacks can backfire?
Certainly, Farah. Thanks so much. Well, this is a good questions and great and difficult question, because we work at CARP. We're working with our legal scholars, our associates, who would say that basically, quite often, what if the person is really an evil person, just basically a person that has done something? Is it fair to attack this person for the evil things he or she has done? Mostly he. So is it okay to attack? And how far should we go? And this is a question. This is well, so the person is really a bad person. We know the facts established, and the person confessed on that. So it's okay to attack. In politics, it's more than a gray area. Certainly, you mentioned about the case of former New York State congressman. He committed fraud. Definitely, this was established. The factual evidence was established, was adjudicated. There we go. Is it okay for us to attack him for that? Well, yes, it's our option, but yes, yes, certainly. The point is how we exaggerate that and how we emphasize this fraud, which he committed, basically, which he committed. Carrot attacks can backfire. They can backfire. As a psychologist, I got my initial degree in psychology and then switched to political psychology and political science. I would say that my fellow psychologists, honestly, they're still struggling with the idea how often things backfire. They do backfire, and intuitively would say, look at the commercials, and people say it's about, I follow I live in Northern Virginia, so I see campaigns, messages from Maryland and Virginia and maybe some other states. So when is enough for individuals? We don't actually know, but still possible. So imagine you're in the middle of the road. You vote for you're leaning to vote for say Republican candidates. You're leaning, and then you hear messages in favor Republican, in favor. You say, well, it's too much. I don't think this way. I don't really vote this way. I like this person, but it's not something that I really want to support. And then, okay, there you go. Election day, you go and switch. But see, once again, I'm saying as a Professor Eric Shiraev, evidence, scientific evidence is so insignificant so far. We don't know much about that. And also, Farah, I'm going to add to this fact that this is so many other factors. So one of my colleagues from University of Washington in Seattle suggested, have we studied the weather affecting people's voting patterns? I said, well, there were some obscure studies, but not much about that. So rain outside and gloomy weather, should I go to vote? No, I don't want to go to vote, and people don't. That could be a factor, but not to diminish the importance of character assassination. I would say yes, they do backfire, but still we are in the just beginning of research of those studies, and I welcome everybody who is graduate students to join this field, because this is an empty field.
Thank you very much for your answer. So my next question is for Jennie. So we've talked about ad hominem attacks as permanent fixture of political campaigns. What we see different this time around is less of a vitriolic epithets and more sort of muted insults. So my question is, we see that Tim Walz started out with this insult for Donald Trump and Republicans in general as weird. And my question is, just being called weirdo make Donald Trump seem less dangerous or more dangerous? Is that something that may resonate with the voters and public more so or less so?
Yeah, I love that. And I want to invite Serge actually to chime in after I share my thoughts, because Serge also mentioned the importance of the vice president. So I'm going to take this question as sort of a way to reflect on vice presidents here too. But I found the weird comment very, very compelling for what it's worth. And Tim Walz actually called Trump and Vance weird before he was the official nominee for vice president, or the official choice, I should say, for vice president. So it became this viral moment. Lots of people used it. It didn't stick around quite as much as I thought that it might, although one of y'all in the chat had mentioned sort of the memeability of the election. And I think we live in a very fast-paced, social media saturated society. So it's perhaps not surprising that these sort of things bubble up and then go away. You know, I think it's a compelling attack, right? Because it sort of taps into this Gen Z sense of like the ick, right? A way to sort of mobilize like something is off about these people. And we can say the big things like wannabe dictator, villain, and that kind of thing, but we've said those and they didn't work, right? And so I do think there is something sort of powerful that we're tapping into when we think about and use attacks like weird. And I will say Trump didn't have a very good response for it. He said, we're very solid people. They're the weird ones, which is perhaps, you know, a pretty standard Trump response of sort of tu quoque, you know, no, this is you. Vance said, oh, they're just calling us names. And I was like, oh, hi, kettle, meet the pot, right? In terms of what they're, yeah, and so Rod's comment in the chat right now too, that we could have played it a little bit more, that Harris Walls could have played it a little bit more. There's a lot of weird stuff that they could have mobilized too. But you know, I think for those of y'all that don't know, I am a native Minnesotan. So Tim Walz is sort of my people here. And, you know, a lot of my people, quote unquote, were excited to see him chosen to be the VP and sort of elevate our state to nationwide attention. But, you know, again, to think about the memeability of the election here, as Harris was mulling over her white Midwestern men that she was undoubtedly going to choose to be her vice president. The memes about, you know, how to choose a Midwestern white, for instance, were really quite funny, if I had to say. But I do think there is, like I said, something sort of important that they're tapping into that with the comment about weird, mobilizing the politics of the ick, perhaps. But Serge, what do you think about VP candidates here?
I think they actually bring something new to discuss, more content to be addressed, and obviously they all have interesting backgrounds. But speaking of kind of weird, I think because of this political and cultural polarization we have in this country right now, the reason why labels like this do not stick, because actually everybody knows Trump is weird and he takes pride in it and he's consistent about being weird. So that's why it's not offense in a way. But basically by calling him weird, you basically saying he is different and he's not like us. And the Republicans say, well, that's exactly what we're saying. We are different from you. And that's we're proud. We have different cultural values. You know, so, and this is our candidate. And in fact, I see this Harris Walz campaign as a campaign of missed opportunities on many fronts. You know, they have not really used a lot of chances they've been given. And basically, like her recent interview with Fox, you go into the Beast Valley, you know, and you basically start actually insulting Trump to his audience instead of actually trying to convert them and just like explaining the benefits of you as a presidential candidate. You're just basically saying bad things about Trump to his electorate, his audience, who cannot be persuaded. I mean, they already, you know, got him. They're going to vote for him, but you're basically spending all this precious airtime trying to tell them how bad he is. And I think it was a poor strategy. And in this context of polarization, they already know what they want, different camps, and by calling each candidate weird or bad, and I mean, it doesn't really add much to persuasion tactics. So that's why I think, you know, it's quite obvious to me that if they wanted to do more harm, they should have targeted these vice presidential candidates. And that's why sometimes it backfires. Like we talked about Tim Walz going hunting pheasants to show his masculinity, acting like alpha male, but then having trouble with his gun, which was actually backfire and result lots of memes. Every conservative podcaster, blogger talked about this. NRA, you know, all these proud gun owners really mocked him on social media. So yeah, I mean, they bring a lot of new content, and basically they really can impact the perception of the actual candidates, presidential candidates in this election.
All right, well, thank you very much. So Serge, my next question is for you. And so my question is regarding Trump's actual assassination attacks. What does those assassination attacks do for his image as a former president, as a presidential candidate, as a politician? What are future historians going to write about him?
It's a tough question, Farah, because the answer is it depends who masters the narrative, and who will have a chance to rewrite history in a sense. So if you again, so media is also polarized, and we have this, niche media who presents news as news with point of view in many different ways. I mean, if you read the media that Democrats read, you probably see that the actual assassination attempt was not a big deal, while in the conservative media, it was the tragedy of the century. So I guess it depends who will have access to control the narrative and who will have a chance to basically write about this. But obviously, even if you have to stay in your information bubble, you'll probably see this either as Trump as a hero, or Trump as a criminal, and that will affect your perception of those presidential candidates in the future. So, because as we know, history also can be whitewashed and rewritten, and there is such a thing as historic revisionism as well. And Martijn can talk about this. But so I guess it will depend where you are, what type of media you consume, and in which information bubble you belong.
Thank you for your answer. It's again a reminder of how influential media is, and if we remain in certain bubbles, our perceptions and our historical recall will be one way or another, and perhaps not objective. But thank you very much. So we are almost at time, but I have one last question for Martijn. And this question is about Joe Biden and the fact that he was portrayed as too old, and his vitality was questioned to be a presidential candidate and a future president, to the point where Democrats were spooked out. They did go ahead and nominate a different candidate. Can you make some historical connections with how a person's vitality, their mental and physical vitality is questioned, and are there ways to overcome it?
Yes, thank you. I've been thinking a bit about this question, and I'm going to stick to what I know best, which is the Roman Empire. And I think the funny thing there is that people did have an obsession with the age of their rulers, but it was rather the other way around. They worried very much about rulers being too young. Being too old was not so much of an issue, because being old in the eyes of Romans, who tended to be on the whole rather conservative, I think, being old was a good thing, because then that meant you had proved your mettle, you had the experience, you had the proverbial gray hairs that were needed for wisdom. So ideally, a leader should be an older, wiser man. And what Romans did have a big problem with was actually, for instance, teenagers on the throne. So many of the bad emperors that we get, a Caligula, a Nero, what do we have in common? Well, they're all 16, 17, 18 years old when they get to power, and that's what really worries Rome, or even worse, child emperors. And we've had instances of 4 and 5-year-olds on the phone, where it's clear that they're not in charge, but that leaves open the question, who is in charge then? Is it their mother? Is it some general who is pulling the strings? So for the ancient Romans, and I know that's also true for medieval culture to some extent, often what they really worried about was rulers being too young, and being old was usually something that was to your credit, I would say.
Oh, thank you very much. We are at time. It's 2 minutes past. I know many of you have other commitments to tend to. So I would like anyone who can stay longer, please continue to have this very enriching conversation. But if you must go, please do so. I will now open the floor to any questions, and I feel like I have missed a few questions.
Can I? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, certainly jump off if you have to. But if you want to stick around, hopefully we can get to some of these Q&A from the audience. And it's kind of hard because there's been a lot of great comments and like chatting in the chat, which is awesome. And that's exactly what we want. But I actually want to pull Tracy's question, which is from a little while ago, but says, psychologically, many of us were taught in childhood to ignore bullies, yet the communication strategy seems to be to double down and fight back or hit harder. How can one respond with higher character? Or are we sort of suggesting that name calling and attacks are more culturally acceptable now than they used to be? And I think that's a great question that I would love to hear. Maybe Eric kick us off, and others share their thoughts on that one too.
Well, there's always just a dilemma to respond, not to respond. This is a big, huge question for political scientists and for communication specialists and for political psychology, for all of us. Exactly. And as we say, it depends on circumstances. Okay, let's analyze circumstances. Certainly, there are many things in our life, in the, okay, say personal life, character attack. There are legal remedies, and there are individual circumstances that allow us to go and just contact our lawyers and contact the law enforcement. In politics, it's very difficult to do, especially in democracies like in the Netherlands or US or India, because there are laws that you have to follow, and somebody says something nasty about you. What do you do about that? So science is just taking only baby steps right there. As we always say, let's look at the circumstances. And I hope CARP will come up with certain ideas, general ideas about cultural and political environments in which we have to operate and just to respond. It's a very difficult question. Either you fight for your dignity and your life and your integrity as an individual, or you take it easy and just leave it alone. So it depends on circumstances. Once again, one of my mentors from University of Michigan, Vladimir Shlapentov, told me sometimes, Eric, sometimes take it easy, don't respond, just leave it alone. However, if it's about your dignity, it's about your integrity, it's about your identity as who you are. When do you have to respond? This is something we still struggle, and we invite your input. We really invite your input as CARP. Jennie, Farah.
Yeah, and I'll just reinforce what you mentioned, Eric, from reputation management point of view. At any point when a person's self-identity is at stake, when the accusations are something that do not resonate with them at a personal level, they are far more likely to ignore them. But when these accusations truly like hurt their self-identity, how they view themselves and how they want to be viewed by others, they are far more likely to respond, react, retaliate, and take them personally, regardless of how serious accusations are. So
I'm reminded of the quote from 2016 from Michelle Obama: "When they go low, we go high." And I don't know if I think that that's true anymore, or that that's a viable strategy for many. I think, and I will say, studying character assassination, people always tell me, oh, social media has just made it so much worse, huh? And I actually don't think that's true in Martin's work. And if you've seen the musical Hamilton, you know that that's not true, that like people have been nasty to each other for as long as people have been living in societies. But I do think we have gotten a little bit more comfortable with hitting back and doing so in a public political realm. And I think, yeah, you know, Eric's point about integrity and dignity is a really important one. As well, in terms of moments when one has to respond and moments when one should sort of let a character attack go.
I can step in and just piggyback on what Jennie has said, and that's true. Well, some of those political attacks from the 19th century, early 20th century, they were pretty nasty. I mean, they were like really, really bad. And you can see that they use words much worse than they use today. But the thing about new media in particular, because media has this subversive power to overwrite culture and social norms and values. And because technology has this power to destroy previous culture and replace it by new culture, in fact, it made it more kind of pronounced and widespread and obvious for more people, like those that uncivil discourse is okay. It has normalized it in a sense that more people are aware of this, you know, uncivil language used by politicians, which I think media has really contributed to the overall normalization of incivility of discourse. I'm not saying how it made the actual rhetoric of politicians worse. I don't think it did, but because media, I mean, the politicians, they are the political animals. They have to follow what the media consumers want. And in fact, negativity proves quite profitable for media companies, which means that anything that has insult or ad hominem attack will be a clickbait, which can be monetized and capitalized on by media companies, which in fact will also make it more accessible and available for media consumers. So I think there are several things we have to analyze here. While I do agree with Jennie 100% that, you know, some of these rhetorical attacks of the past were much worse than today, but with the media amplification and its impact on discourse, it has made it worse because it actually shown that it's okay, it's normal, it's fine to act like this. So unfortunately, civil discourse and positive information do not bring money to media companies.
All right, so I have one question from Avi that I'd like to read out. It was mentioned earlier that Trump focused on projecting masculinity both in the Republican primaries and general election in 2016. Would you say he is taking the same approach in the 2024 election, or he's backed down when it comes to his overly masculine image?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think he is attempting to take the same tack. I think it's maybe not working as well in 2024 as it did in 2016, partially because Rod mentioned in the chat earlier sort of the weird like swaying dancing thing. And I think, you know, people are starting to pick up on these moments when Trump himself seems to be the senile one, as opposed to Biden, where he's losing, you know, trains of thought and that kind of thing. And so I don't see like a major shift in Trump's own strategy, but I think it's maybe working a little bit less well because folks are starting to point out some of these moments where his masculinity is slipping and he's appearing more senile. I will say the continued focus on border security, the continued reminders that the union of CBP has endorsed him are, I think, sort of elements of this masculine projection of strength that I will protect the border, whereas Harris cannot and has not, and that kind of thing are a reminder of that strategy. I also, for what it's worth, I'm not a psychologist, but I don't know that Trump has any other way of being in the world other than attempting to dominate and sort of fill the airspace with masculine bluster.
Would anyone else like to chime in?
There was one question, maybe we can make this our last question and then wrap, that I saw earlier about I forget who asked it, I'm sorry, but I jotted it down because I thought it was interesting. But it was a question about at what point do Trump's attacks stop working? You know, sort of continued reminders of, and I saw this one too in my research to participate, that Harris is mentally impaired, for instance, like things that we clearly know to not be true, of course. And so, yeah, do any of y'all have opinions on if there is a point at which Trump's attacks, especially the ones that are very clearly untrue, will stop working?
There is a study in psychology, basically, since 19th century about the information overload and about thresholds. And at a certain point in our life when something which is broadcast and sent to you, becomes too much. And that could be a factor. That could be a factor, by the way. And the challenge is, and the good news for us, we don't know much, and that's why we can study. But on the other hand, Jennifer, absolutely, yes, we believe that many people, many people will say, okay, enough is enough. I'm done with this. I'm not going to vote, or I'm going to vote for instead of Trump, I'm going to vote for somebody else, or I'll vote for Kamala. So that's again a factor. But please let me know how you feel. Academic research is really scarce.
Yeah, I think Rod's point in the chat too is really good, that you know, we have to think about, as we always do when we study character attacks, the audience. And there are a number of people that are still actively, enthusiastically consuming Trump's attacks. Sorry, Serge.
No, I was responding to Rod's kind of comment as well. In a sense, they're no longer serving the purpose of actually smearing her image, but they are serving as a reminders that kind of continue priming the audience. So I'm just reminding you to have it mentally accessible. So it's on top of your head that she's such and such. And so they're no longer kind of like service character attacks, and in a sense to kind of taint her reputation, but in a way as a reminder. So those basically service framing and the priming techniques.
Yeah, if I can add to that as well, I have the impression that some of these attacks are not about persuading any audience at all, and whether people believe it or not is not even relevant. It's just the fact that you can see that I am bashing the opponent, so that you can cheer me on and laugh and yell at her, or vice versa. And that's what it's really about. It's confirming what tribe you belong to.
Yeah, and I would just add a little bit to what Martin's talking about, being part of a tribe. Some of these attacks will not necessarily play out in how much it damages the other party or the participant, but it's about those constituents. How does one connect with them? How do we, or rather, how do participants find catharsis in conversation, in rhetoric, in finding shared experiences? Let me see if there are any other questions. Okay. I think this is about how many questions we can entertain today. Thank you all for a wonderful, rich conversation to tickle our imagination and curiosity with the upcoming election. Thank you again for all of our participants and our panelists coming from all time zones. Thank you for your time, and hopefully we will all meet again in another one of these webinars.